Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Sunstone Symposium. This is session 263, 3 lessons I've learned in giving my kids a foundation after faith transition. So at Sunstone, we're making it a goal to build a community that allows for many ways for people to express their faith. And our tagline is, there's more than one way to Mormon. And we invite you all to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. And so we ask you to support our mission, to support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. So after the symposium, the staff will edit, polish, and re-upload all of this year's session videos to the Whova app, and it'll take a couple of weeks for that to happen. But once it's done, every video will be available to watch and rewatch in the Whova app, the same app that many of you are accessing it with, through the end of 2021. So please type any questions you may have into the Whova app. Will that be an option? Okay. The Q&A will be accessible through Whova. And if you're watching in person, we will open up the audience mic for questions and for discussion, I believe. So about this presentation, most discussions about faith transition center on adults. But what about the children of these parents? Throughout my faith transition, this is quoting John here, throughout my faith transition, I've wrestled with how my wife and I can best raise our kids, particularly while living in Utah County. In this presentation, I'll share lessons I've learned and lead a discussion about what attendees have learned from their own experience. And whether you're hearing uncomfortable messages over the pulpit or have left the church entirely, you might similarly feel uneasy in contemplating what you can give your kids as a replacement. So let's talk about it. Let's introduce our speaker. Jon Ogden is the founder of upliftkids.org, a resource for parents who are looking to give their kids a spiritual foundation when narrow religion feels limiting. And he's the author of When Mormons Doubt, A Way to Save Relationships and Live a Quality Life. I will now give the floor over to Jon. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. All right, well, welcome and thanks for coming, everybody. I would like to start with just a bit of a very simple meditation. It can be eyes open, eyes closed, very informal. But basically just a meditation where we fully arrive where we are. Drew, I don't know if you want to close the doors just for sound. So just sent into your body. You can feel your feet on the ground. You can pay attention to your breath. You notice any tension that you might have in your body, and just see if you can slightly relax the body. Just to be fully present. The question I want to pose is, what can we do? We have an hour together here. It's going to pass very quickly. What can we do to be present for this hour? And what can we do to get something out of it? So without COVID, I think we could have circled up. We were trying to do it, and it got kind of messy. We have to have these two mics recording, circle up and see each other face to face and have a discussion. In lieu of that, here we are, doing it this way. And so what can we do to be fully present and experience something together over the next hour? This is the question. So with that in mind, that's just a rhetorical question. The others will be discussion questions. And so, welcome. Like Jennifer said, my name is Jon Ogden, and I want to talk today about 3 lessons. This presentation is in 2 parts. So the first is experiences, and the second part is the lessons. So I'm going to start by experiences. And the question I want us to explore together, so as a discussion, though I'll share just experiences of my own and then open it up for discussion, is this one. What is one thing from your childhood or teenage experience within religion that you remember fondly or that served you well? So sometimes, in my experience, when somebody has discovered things that are unpalatable about religion, all your memories can kind of sour about religion. So there's this question, what's one thing that you remember fondly or that served you well? And for me, the thing, as I've been sitting with this question that's come to mind, is singing hymns and primary songs. Remember, in primary, singing the song, Heavenly Father, are you really there? And even now, there's something moving about that line and about the doubt expressed in that line. It's asked so sincerely. An answer could be no, right? But it's so sincere that I have memories of singing that song and feeling really moved in primary. And then as a teenager, I went to EFY, and I remember singing with all the people there, and this huge, massive people singing a hymn, and just feeling really moved there too. Like there's something beyond myself. And so that's what I remember fondly. And the things that have served me well, I'll just mention one thing. As I've been thinking about this week, I started this book that's about health by a Harvard medical researcher. And he says that one thing that they've discovered that helps people live longer and be healthier is fasting. And there are a bunch of different ways that he outlines to fast, but he says that's one thing that can help people live longer. And it just made me reflect more on the sense of asceticism, the denying of comfort for better well-being that I learned through fasting and Mormonism. And many world religions have similar things, this idea that you can actually live a happier life not by leaning into comfort at every moment, but actually leaning into discomfort. Some of the other things he lists are having your body experience coldness can also, obviously not indefinitely, but can also enliven the body. And then blanking on some of these things he listed. What are they? A high-intensity interval training. So really pushing the body just for a short amount of time and then relaxing, short amount of time and relaxing. So all of these things are about discomfort. And I think religion can help kind of say, hey, let's be more ascetic in our lives. So I want to ask that question to all of you. What is one thing from your childhood or teenage experience within religion that you remember fondly or that served you well? And if you feel comfortable, I'd like to just have you talk to somebody you're sitting next to. You don't have to, by any stretch. If you don't want to, that's perfectly fine. I put the questions in the Whova app. So if you'd rather just journal or just silently reflect for just a few moments, that's totally fine too. But if you'd like, can turn to somebody you're sitting next to and just talk about this question. What is one thing from your childhood or teenage experience within religion that you remember fondly or that served you well? So go ahead and turn to somebody you're sitting next to if you feel comfortable with that. And sorry, I'll just say for those online that you can respond via the app. And we'll see your responses in the app. All right, spend another 30 seconds or so to wrap it up. So I'm curious what you guys shared. If anybody feels comfortable to just share, I don't know if it reaches that far, but we can try. If anybody feels comfortable they'd like to share with the larger group, I'd like to hear maybe 2 or 3 responses. Anything stand out for anybody?
I'll respond for somebody on the app. Kenyon mentioned that confidence was a really an unusual thing for him to grow up with, to have this sort of sense of chosenness and specialness within the church and within the religion. And I know that he's certainly not alone in that. That's a very common experience of knowing that you're a chosen generation, or that you were born in the covenant, and just a sense of chosenness and choice. And certainly that can have interesting effects, but that really can also give a sense of confidence. And he said that it pushed me to try and do well in school and to try and be exceptionally kind to others as well.
Oh, cool.
So really brings out the best traits.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
Something that served me well, I think, is being able to speak in front of people. I've never enjoyed it. I've never been extremely good at it, but it's something that you learn young in the church, and you have to sit with that discomfort because it's just part of what you learn to do. And I feel bad for my kids because they don't have that. So, yeah.
Yeah, it stretches you. I feel the same thing. Thanks for sharing that.
He keeps nudging me, so I'll share mine. When I was younger, when I was 7, my sister died at the age of 16. And 7 years later, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so both of those very tragic moments in our family's life, we were buoyed up by our ward members and our community. And so seeing the love and support that came flowing in was tremendous. And that's a thing that's kind of why I stay, is the community and the service and the love and the unconditional, hey, we're here for you. Cleaning the house, bringing meals, bringing cookies with a note, all of that stuff, that has meant the world over the years as I've dealt with mortality and human existence.
So beautiful. Thank you. Yeah.
So this just came to me. I used to serve in the military, and in the Air Force, there's in military wide, there's quite a few suicides, and so resiliency training was a big part of our service. And part of that resiliency training, they found that those that grew up with either very strong family heritage or community heritage protected them downrange when traumatic experiences happened, when their buddies died. There are those that would break down and go the suicide route or attempted suicide, and those that seem to thrive in stressful situations. And I look back at my own kind of journey with Mormonism and find that strong community, chosenness, I think someone said, was a big part of my own resilience. I appreciate that. I thank the universe for that.
Yeah. That's powerful. Yeah, a foundation that you can rely on and when things seem really tumultuous. Yeah, such a good example.
It's hard to hear you.
Is it? Okay, thank you for telling me. I appreciate that. Yeah, such a great example. Thanks for sharing. Final comment? Anybody want to share?
I'll add one more
Oh,
from
yeah,
the
please.
app. It says, I learned at a young age responsibility and a work ethic. I was involved in leadership throughout my youth, which has helped me in public speaking and expressing my opinions. And I'll also add that this is by Alicia Hall.
Okay.
So not something that you necessarily see with women very often. Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, this is bringing up so many memories of my own. Kind of when I was preparing, I was like, yeah, there was hymns, there was primary songs, but there is so much. There is so much that I look back fondly and just have served me well and continues to serve me well. So the second part of the story is kind of when we discover that the story that we've been told isn't quite what we thought it was. This is an experience that happened to me. Initially, it happened on my mission. The second day of my mission, I was in California talking to evangelicals and atheists, and we knocked on this guy's house who was really into religion, and over the course of the conversation, he mentioned that Joseph Smith shot people in Carthage jail. It was like, oh gosh, let me set you straight, and I got out the Doctrine and Covenants, and I read it to him. I'm like, this is the narrative. You have no idea what you're talking about. And then a few months later, I was in an LDS library, and I pulled a book down that was giving accounts of Joseph Smith's death, and it said, yeah, he had a pistol gun, and he shot people. And I was just like, what? What is this, right? I was so flummoxed. I was like, why did I so emphatically lie to that person who actually knew what he was talking about? And it was one of many experiences like that on my mission, where somebody would tell me something, and I'd be like, absolutely not. And then I would learn later, I was like, absolutely yes. And I just felt really disoriented, and it became very traumatic for me. I remember nights, some nights just having to will myself to be excited about having breakfast in the morning, because it was the only sense of pleasure that I was getting at the time from life, just because I was so traumatized by the disorientation of finding out things that I was certain were true weren't quite true. And I wrote to my dad kind of in desperation, and he sent me an apologetics book. I wrote to my high school psychology teacher, who wasn't LDS. She wrote me very kindly, wrote me a 10-page letter that said, stay on the mission, you can sort this out later. You've said yes to this, continue saying yes to this. And so between those two things, I kind of put it aside and said, okay, I'm saying yes. And then I came home and went to BYU, and I was so involved in everything, and none of these questions were coming up in my circles, that they were just all on the shelf until friends and family members started leaving Mormonism, and I was like, why? And I started, those old questions started coming up again, and again I realized oh, this is far more complicated than I thought it was. And so it led me to explore more of those questions, and in the process, I had this moment that kind of clicked for me. I was around the Book of Mormon, and it just changed everything. And I thought, oh, like Richard Bushman says, the dominant narrative in the church isn't true. And the immediate next thought was, what do I do with my family? Right? I have no idea what to do. And so I knew that I loved all of these things that that I remembered fondly and still actively participated in, and loved so much about the community. And to this day, I don't know the answer. Right? I'm going to share these 3 lessons, not as an authority figure, saying this is the answer, but as things that I've wrestled with and come out the other side on, because I honestly don't know what's best for my kids. I'm still in the struggle. But I've learned some things. And so, just to continue the narrative, I started, in addition to going to my LDS ward, started going to Oasis. I was part of the group that started an Oasis chapter in Provo, which is a secular, weekly secular group. And I was like, maybe this would work. And so we started doing Oasis every week. And it was very positive, but it was kind of lacking this connection to something bigger, a myth, bigger than mundane life or bigger than partisan politics. And my heart still yearned for that something bigger. And so I want to ask a question here, just given everything that I've shared. If you've had a faith crisis or a faith journey, and you might not have, which is also fine, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing in raising your kids, or that you're facing personally? So just kind of the same thing. If you can, just sit by somebody that you want to talk to again, or just reflect personally. But this is the question. If you've had a faith crisis, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing in raising your kids or facing personally? So let's just break and talk about that for a few minutes. All right. We can go ahead and wrap that up, maybe in the next 30 seconds, and we can talk about that. All right. So I'd like to hear from people. What came up in that discussion? Oh, keep going? It's a good sign. Would anybody like to share what came up there? Yeah. And yeah.
I thought you were going to someone behind me. This is like the old school testimony meetings, when someone would stand and usually it was a boy that would take the mic around, though.
Or progressive.
Progressive, yeah. We actually coincidentally just argued about this morning because we're in a mixed faith marriage, I guess we'd call it. And, our biggest struggle is, we can agree that we're okay. I can be me. I can live my truth. She can live her truth. But when you involve kids in the mix, where does that truth come in? And I told her this morning, if, I'm the one that's more out. And I said, if I'm at a 0 and the LDS church is at 100, just going every week, which I'm okay with, sure, but that already puts them at a 70, right? They're already getting that. And how do I, and I don't want to say counter that, right? But there are some things that I feel are hurtful, and I want to address those, but I don't know how to address them if I don't know that they're being brought up. or what they learned that day. And I think that's my biggest struggle.
Yeah. You don't know what is being taught, but you know it could be helpful, it could be harmful. Yeah. Thank you.
I think there's the other side of that too. If you're not going, the church does have a lot of activities and things that are service oriented and getting to know people and leadership. And so if you don't go, then that all falls on you as a parent to figure it out, or to figure out, do it through other ways, scouts now, or sports teams or whatever. So it seems like it's either all you as a parent, or you give it over to the church and whatever they believe. So there's not like a happy medium that we've been able to find.
Yeah. There we go. Beat me to the punchline. I think it's very real. I feel that tension personally. I think like there are so many positive things that happen in community, and having to deal with people who you don't necessarily agree with, right? Sorry, I keep backing away from the mic, my apologies. That you don't necessarily agree with, and that can be really healthy in that discomfort sort of sense, right? It's like the asceticism of fasting, or whatever other thing it might be. The discomfort actually leads to greater health, and I feel that in my life. And at the same time, right? You don't know how much remediation am I going to have to do based on what they're being taught. Yeah, it's a real struggle. Yeah, Sarah.
My gentle kind of surrender over and over again is, as a therapist, I have an exaggerated understanding of the very worst case scenarios, right? And so as a mother and like a mama bear, it's like this deep kind of continual reminder that like what church means to my children and like this stage of their development does not come with the stories that I possess. And so it's like that delicate balance of like wanting to live into integrity about the things I know that can be detrimental, while at the same time like a 3-tiered heaven system that's on a like coloring page really just means to my 3-year-old, like, look at the color purple, where it has a much heavier story to me. And so it's like that delicate balance of like adult knowing and partnering with a child who is entering that experience very differently than I am.
Yeah, very wise. Thank you.
Yeah, something that's come up between my wife and I, and we have a son on a mission, so there you go, is, will we screw our kids up by going to church or not going to church? I think either way, we're saving for therapy for our children, so I think we're good, right?
Yeah. All roads lead to therapy, yes.
So I'm probably the most giant weirdo in this room because I've not gone through a faith crisis. I'm the pastor of the Salt Lake City congregation, and 90% of the people in our church are converts. And I feel it very deeply because I have a difficult time with trying to figure out what to say to the kids, and helping the kids, and how can I be the best pastor for the kids, especially teenage boys who have already had this authority. I think that's the word, right? Had this authority imbued in them, and when they come to Community of Christ, they don't have that. And like they see lots of women up front, and it's weird and strange, and it's a really, really difficult and different situation for them. So I see them just backing away and not even looking anymore. So like it's just a hard situation. So I'm here to learn more about how I can help kids to make that transition.
Nice segue.
You're welcome.
Yes. It wasn't planted. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. You want to share?
From the app.
Okay, great. Yeah.
We have somebody mentioning wrestling between the difficulties that come from a mixed faith marriage and the requirements, or rather the obligations that come in a partnership versus having kids and wondering, am I feeling that you're being complicit in harm to them? Where's my greater priorities? Is it in the marriage? Is it in the kids? There's conflict here.
Yeah.
And that's a really difficult thing to navigate for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you all. So, let's get to the lessons. I can just contextualize it by giving some of my context. So I tried I was mentioning trying the secular approach, but just feeling like not having full connection to something transcendent, not having that need met. And then within Mormonism, I'll just share my story. Right, it is not right or wrong. My wife had a really difficult moment in our ward where people were. She was a Relief Society teacher, and people were complaining about her lessons, but not to her, to the bishop. And then it's drama, so I won't go into it. But it was a really negative experience because she didn't know who was complaining. She didn't really know how many people, or if it was just one person, or if it was nobody. I don't know. And so it was like this passive-aggressive tension that she was trying to just say, hey, just be direct. If you have a question, like, or if you don't like it, we can talk about it. And so it wasn't good. And so this was happening at the same time. My kids were increasingly not liking Mormonism, and it kind of bottled up of like, okay, now it's getting more urgent. You know, what do I do? And I had found Lower Lights, which is a mindfulness community, and had found a lot of friends, some of whom are here, and through Lower Lights. And I'd also found real spiritual strength there. Like, oh, this is it. Like I'm sensing into the transcendent or the divine. And it's really powerful. It's like coming home, right? This connection to the all. And I was having these experiences in this mindfulness community, and it was wonderful. You know, I'd go on these silent retreats or various retreats, and I felt like I had this connection again. But like all mindfulness communities that I know of, I've heard of some, but I haven't experienced any, this one is for grown-ups. Like it's hard to have a silent retreat if you have a 3-year-old, right? There's a reason that monasteries are full of celibates, right? Because like we cannot have kids here, right? We are dedicated to the practice. And so in these communities, a grown-up leaves the family to go to the retreat and then comes back into the house. I have first-hand experience of this and can't handle it because it's like I'm trying to meditate and the kids are going crazy. But that's where the practice comes. That's where the practice is real, right? Nevertheless, the question was still in my mind, like, well, what do we do for kids, right, who need this help? And so as part of a 9-month program that we did through Low Lights, Drew is here and Amanda is here, we started talking over the course of the 9 months. What could this look like? We just kept the conversation going, not knowing exactly where we would turn, and eventually it turned into this idea of upliftkids.org, which is a curriculum and lesson library, as an attempt to say, like, can this work, right? I view it as a question that I'm living into, that I don't yet know the answer, but I feel an urge to explore this question. And so the lessons that I've pulled, this is the second part of this time together, is the first one is this idea of honoring ancient wisdom and modern science. So the reason for this is that in my limited experience, when it is all secular, when it's all psychology in a secular sense, you don't necessarily talk about and connect to the divine or the transcendent, whatever we say. And so it becomes very clinical and sterile. It can, at least. And so ancient wisdom, for all the flaws that ancient texts contain, which are very numerous, there are glimpses of something transcendent, the kingdom of God within, right? The Tao, right? This connection to the all. And so by honoring ancient wisdom, wherever it comes, wherever this glimpse of this something bigger is shown, and modern science, the hope is that we can kind of balance or fill out this secular approach, which again can be sterile. I'm curious, we don't have to get into small groups for this, but I would like to open a discussion. If any of you have had experiences, does any of this conjure up an experience or a thought that somebody has in this moment? Maybe I can ask a different way. Have anybody had an experience with an ancient text that has been transformative in some way? Or that you like, yeah, that's a connection to something bigger than myself? Or vice versa, connection to something in secularism? Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I'm just waving vaguely.
Yeah, I'll just come up.
Sure.
Similar to you, I've had experiences like that. But with me, it was I guess, even understanding of mindfulness, or this idea that, at first, I guess I should say I was struggling with the concept of deity, what happens after we die. And it struck me that I honestly, if I was honest with myself, have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
Bullet to the brain, I guess none of us really know. And I think around that exact time is when I discovered Eckhart Tolle, and I think that, that kind of made my brain explode a little bit, and, my nose is bleeding and things like that as I was just understanding, I read The Power of Now, and as I listened to the things that they were saying, I think that kind of got me thinking more about living and less about dying.
Oh.
Yeah, so thinking about ancient texts, I personally, in the past, have loved to read texts from different traditions. But when it comes to my family and my kids, I found that it doesn't translate over well. And not to diss those texts,
Yeah.
but they're so problematic in so many ways. That said, there is something in the written word in its various forms that is powerful and transcends that text, whether that be poetry or stories. And so I found that in my family, it's more the poetry and the stories, and maybe a little Pema Chodron on the side,
Nice.
or maybe a little Bhagavad Gita on the side. But the written word in its various forms
Yeah.
is
I love that.
useful.
I'm just super curious. What resonates best?
Oh, you know what? It's a day-to-day thing.
Day-to-day?
It depends on people's
Any
moods.
poets that you go to?
Rabindranath Tagore, an Indian poet.
Okay.
It really just depends on what's within arm's reach, because we're all like, we're so tired. What book is there? I can't find that one. Let's grab this one
Oh, wow.
instead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that experience. Yeah, thank you. That's terrific. That goes to the next point, the next lesson I've learned, which is that it's really difficult. I went into this project of doing this lesson library and curriculum thinking I could just pull, I've read these texts, I can just pull these together and then boom, you got a lesson. But it's incredibly difficult to translate it, to make it to kids and engaging and have a spiritual experience together. And we just found time and again, we start a lesson and we go down a rabbit hole and we're like, oh, I thought I understood this. I'm talking about conflict or kindness or anxiety. I thought I understood this, and as we start exploring, it's like, oh, wow, there's a lot here. And it becomes very difficult. We'll spend 15 to 20 hours on a lesson that lasts 20 minutes to get it to a point where a kid can resonate with it. And the idea of wisdom texts, I agree with you. It's very hard to figure out, okay, how do we adapt this? And many times it's like, yeah, you can't. Not for a toddler, not for a 3-year-old, not for a 5-year-old, sometimes not even for a 10-year-old, right? It just is so difficult to figure out. And nevertheless, there is power in the process of opening up the conversation, right? Just starting the conversation. Because what I found is that many times I just go to day-to-day life. It's like, I know I want to do this. I know I want to talk to my kids about compassion, and my faucet is broken. And so I'm focused on the faucet, and unless I have some demarcation, right, which might be going to church, which is another aspect of church that is very nice. It's just there at a certain time every week. I forget it. It's like, oh yeah, the faucet can wait, I guess. Go and do this bit of structure. The third lesson that I want to talk about is finding community might be even more difficult than finding the resources. But it's the goal. So, at least it's one goal that I hold. There's a saying by Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist monk, and he says, the next Buddha is the Sangha. And what he means by that is that, similar to Christianity, there's this idea of return, right? Christ returning, iterations. And he says the next Buddha is the Sangha. The Sangha means community in the Buddhist community. And so he's saying that the next Buddha is, rather than in the past, this is what I understand him to mean, in the past it's been a guy, in almost all cases, says, I'm speaking on behalf of God, and this is the word of God, right? And everybody get in line because this is the word of God. And I really love this idea of the next Buddha is the Sangha. It's more like the day of Pentecost in the Bible, where the Spirit descends on all, and we follow what is alive in each of us to a new community. And the way that we view it at Uplift is we talk about soul's purpose. And so the people who are working at Uplift, we each have something that is calling to us about this project. And Uplift is the confluence of soul purposes. And we don't know where it's going because we're just living into it. Yet it is, we are living along with it, I guess, to see what will arise from it, listening for what wants to arise. And we have the intent to grow a community without ego or personality, but to be one player in our orchestra. So rather than viewing this as saying, like, this is the answer, right? It's like, this is one solution that could help this very real problem. And hopefully, you're also working on a solution, and we can listen to that, and we can collaborate and work together to see what will arise from this very real situation. So I'm curious if there are any questions. We have, let's see, how much? 15 minutes left? 12 minutes? Okay, 12 minutes. And so I'm curious if there are any questions to lead up to as we close off. Yeah.
So you mentioned community here kind of at the end, but are there anything that either you with Uplift or other things that you've done to help develop community for your kids and help them participate with other, or just have the community aspects?
Yeah. I thank you for that question. So Uplift, we launched the first of the year quietly just to see, like, we're kind of doing a prototype, testing what's happening, and we've been doing this full-time for a month with the goal of getting there. But getting there is more daunting than I initially thought. I thought you just, like, kind of put up a shingle and people are like, oh yeah, totally, I'll come, right? But it's a little tricky to think of, like, well, how do you gather and talk about spirituality without just having the same problems? Because it's all humans, right? It's all humans. And so, you know, I think about the instance that you shared about how, what are my kids being taught? Here we are, right? And it's like, what would they still be? They would still be being taught by somebody else, for good and for bad, right? There's always going to be some downside because it's always a human being. You know, I disagree with my own self from a year ago, right? I definitely, if my kid were being taught by myself 10 years ago, by who I was 10 years ago, I mean, I'd be like, no, right? Don't listen to that guy. But that's the human experience. And so we're prototyping different ways to get to that answer and seeing what people want. As they go through the curriculum, we're listening for people who are doing it in pods and saying, oh, is this the direction we want to go? We've done facilitated calls with parents where we start to gather community, and it seems so far at least that isn't quite what the audience wants. And so again, it's this idea of the Buddha being the Sangha, of like us leaning into what is arising in addition to being active participants. And it's all a question, right? It's an experiment. Any other questions that anybody would like to ask?
Carla, can I ask the question that you put on the app?
Oh, yes, I saw that. Yes.
So she had asked, as the pastor of the local Community of Christ here in Salt Lake, what can we do as a church to help kids of parents who have gone through a faith tradition? And I'd love to piggyback on that and asking, what can churches do in general for those who are going through a faith transition or have been through one and who are seeking or experiencing a more individuative or expansive faith? What are the needs that churches can meet, and how can they meet them?
Yeah, I love this. Help kids of parents. So it's helping the kids. So talking directly to the kids, and their parents have had a faith transition. One thing that I find, I don't know, it depends on the kid's age. This is one possibility, is to talk about growing up, and just as how at one point walking was really difficult, and now it's no longer difficult. You change as you develop. And we have a lesson at Uplift on growing up. And if they can start to sense this idea of, yeah, I've grown up, I'm no longer the person who I once was. And then, again, this depends on the kid's age, because it's a concept rather than an embodied experience. Definitely for teens, they can start to sense like, oh yeah, I've changed repeatedly. And then it's not much more of a leap to say like, my parents change repeatedly. Like development never stops, right? We just keep developing. And so it's this concept of growing up. I'm still growing up as a parent. And we're all still growing up. And we're going to hopefully get to a point where we no longer believe the exact same way that we do right now, because that is growing up. And so that concept can be helpful, to point out like everything is growing up. And it's all changing, which it can be a Buddhist concept as well. I don't know if that helps, if that is the question that you were, is it close to what you're asking? So I think that if a kid can see this, then they can have greater empathy. I've changed, and so are my parents. And that actually helps them feel grounded, in my experience, because it's like, oh, yeah, that is a pattern. Even though it's all change, it is a pattern, and I can stand on that. Yeah, any other questions?
Hi, John. First, I came after you gave your primary lecture, so I apologize if my question is off to the side. First, to share, I'm a public school teacher. There's a program in the school for the high schoolers who learn a concept to visit the local middle school and teach the middle schoolers that concept. It's a chance for the high schoolers to share knowledge they receive from their teachers, but also within a day or two to give it to another, a junior, to themselves.
Yeah.
Plus the middle schoolers see them as cool, older, and project themselves as being in high school a couple of years hence. That whole thing is repeated when the middle schoolers go to the elementary school, 5, 6 year grade level, and the process repeats. So to apply this concept to, I think, what you're presenting, have the kids do that.
Yeah.
It could be it could be a lesson about morals, ethics, whatever, kindness. And I'm thinking back to my own family home evenings. Sometimes I might doze off. I hear a principle from my father I've already learned. But then occasionally the dad hands me the manual and says, teach the lesson back to us. So I'm now standing on the fireplace mantle, and now I'm engaged in teaching and repeating. So please glean from what I shared to apply to your
No, I love that. Yeah, we have mentioned that in the how to guide a lesson, but definitely such a useful teaching tool. I mean, I remember as a teacher and priest, as a young person, having those responsibilities, and that's really where where the rubber hit the road, and I really transformed because of those experiences. And I think it is good for younger kids to see older kids teaching as well. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. There is one question here in the app. It says, have you had experiences with any texts, ancient wisdom or secular, that have supported you and your family in your spiritual journeys? Yes, the answer to that is yes. We have a wisdom library. It's upliftkids.org/wisdom that pulls from the world traditions. And we just barely started it, so we're filling it out. And it points to like the best parables of Jesus and the best of the Bhagavad Gita, the best of the Tao Te Ching. And so it's like a compilation of all these wisdom texts, and then those can be inserted into the lesson. And so other families will take LDS stories and just weave them into the lesson, and that's perfectly compatible as well, or Christian stories, and they'll just weave them into the lesson as they see fit. For me, it still is a process, because I had an experience recently. I wrote about it recently, actually, about reading the book of Ezekiel to my 10-year-old and forgetting that it's a very strange book. Ezekiel lays on his side for 390 days, and then he gets a brick and yells at it for 40 days. And, my 10-year-old's like, I don't know about this. And then switching to the Sermon on the Mount, and there's a line in that says, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's like, don't get divorced unless the woman has committed a serious sexual sin. And saying that to my 10-year-old is like, it's like, I don't want you repeating this at the playground. Like, this is what we believe. It just made me uncomfortable sitting with that idea that was just like from a more misogynistic time. And but so many of the other things were so beautiful in the text. So it is a matter of kind of culling through and sifting and finding the parts that are most resonant, that still are alive, just as applicable as they were in ancient times. And so it's a process. But the answer to that question is yes, and we're building out the wisdom library. Have you had experiences with any texts? The ones that we like are up there. Wisdom or secular? Yes, many secular. Many things from philosophy and other sources there. So there's a lot to be said for all of that. Any final questions? Yeah.
So the stuff that you've developed, do you have child psychologists and kind of child development experts involved with it as well? Or what's the scientific background behind it?
Yeah, thank you. So we pull from many different psychologists, including those from Greater Good. Amanda, is it okay if I say you have a degree in school psychology, and then another person working with us is studying to be a therapist, and we also coordinate. We have an advisor, and we are seeking for more advisors and more partnerships to expand that angle as well, to vet it all out and to be in line with the best psychological research. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Jon, do you test your families? You test out the curriculum?
Yeah. Yeah, our families are tester families, and sometimes it doesn't go well, and that's good for us to know early on. We also did a prototype with 6 families and then another prototype with 30 families, and we continue to keep a close ear on these families who are doing it actively and refining as we get feedback. My kids are very blunt and very honest, and it hurts my feelings. But it makes the experience better for other families. Yes. 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 Yeah.
Do you guys incorporate any kind of contemporary, fictional stories? I mean, Harry Potter. Some of those things that kids can really relate to, but still have some pretty good moral themes.
Yes. We have one experience. Oh, repeat the question. Yeah, he said do we incorporate anything from current stories like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings? Yes, we do. And one specific example of that is the hero's journey lesson. So we talk about how we all participate in the hero's journey as human beings. And we pull from one of my personal favorites that I discovered through my kids is Avatar: The Last Airbender, which pulls from a lot of Eastern religions and is really fantastic from a spiritual point of view, as well as other stories. But we look to continue to do that. We have done some things with Harry Potter, but we haven't done, I don't think we've done Lord of the Rings yet. That would be fascinating to explore. But yeah, I agree. So the benefit is that you have a lesson on compassion, and then the next time let's say you're watching Lord of the Rings, and it's like, you're talking about Samwise Gamgee, it's like, there's an embodied example of compassion, or I guess Samwise would be loyal, more than compassion. But it's like an ongoing conversation where you have a sit-down structured lesson, and then you look for ways that it just naturally arises throughout the week, and it keeps the conversation going. Yeah, so such a good question. Yeah, thank you. I think this is a good place to end, unless there are additional questions there. So I'd like to just end by kind of mirroring how we began, just with a very short meditation. And again, informal, nothing, you don't have to have a meditation experience. But just tune back into your body. You can feel your feet on the floor. You can experience any tension that you might have in your body. And you can turn to that part of yourself that is already still. And as you turn to that part of yourself that's still, you can be reminded that we all have the same struggles in common at some level. Even if the specifics are different. Still part of the human experience. You can bring attention to your breath, just feeling the in-breath and the out-breath. Okay. Well, I want to say thank you for everybody for coming to this. I would love to continue a conversation. If you have any interest in exploring these challenges, I'm right there with you. I am in the midst of it. And I'm looking forward to a future where we can collaborate together with each other and in conjunction with Spirit and the divine toward a better future for the next generation. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for attending and for supporting Sunstone. For those of you who are in the app or have yet to download the app, the conversation can continue there as well in the chat and the Q&A there. Thank you so much, John.